Hello and welcome to Legislative Access. We're here at the Access TV studios in Salina, and with me today we have our guest, JR. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad you could be here.
Thank you. Grateful to be here.
Part of our purpose of being here together is to get to know our elected officials. So to start off with, if you could tell us what are some things you enjoy doing in your free time? What are your hobbies? Just kind of put out there, who is this guy? We want to know who you are.
I like to spend a lot of time on Twitter and Facebook, obviously. No, I enjoy watching sporting events. You know, I'm a big K-State sports fan, really excited about the bowl game coming up. You know, the Chiefs, the Royals, go to some of the Kansas City soccer games even. So yeah, that's primarily what I like to do in my free time. I do like to travel. I go over to Colorado pretty frequently to do some skiing and things like that with the family. So those are primarily my hobbies outside of spending 4 or 5 months in the legislature.
Now you mentioned family a little bit and friends. Tell us,
Sure.
In Salina, what is your area, your district, so people can kind of in their minds, I go here to here and here to here?
Sure. Without it being too boring, I represent largely West Salina and Northwest Saline counties. So the line is essentially 9th Street with some zigs and zags going south, and then it cuts across to the east at Wayne Street, essentially to the flood control levee, and then the southern line is Magnolia Street, basically near the mall and South High School. And then Stephen Johnson would have the south area, and then Diana Dirks would be our representative from the east side of town.
Very good.
Yep.
Now you mentioned Colorado, you've mentioned some travel. How about family, friends?
Sure. My mom was born and raised here in Salina, as was I. My brother lives in Mays, Kansas. He's a school psychologist, and my sister is an architect. She lives here in town, and she works for Crestwood. She's married and has 3 little boys, 2 twins, and little boy Joey. And then my parents, my dad is retired. He was 50 years with AT&T right over here on 7th Street. So he's been here quite some time. And then my mom was a first grade teacher at St. Mary's Grade School. She's been a first grade teacher since I was in 2nd grade.
Yeah. So now, did you graduate from the
Yeah,
Catholic
I went
school?
to Salina Catholic School. So I started out at Sacred Heart for kindergarten and St. Mary's for grade school, and then Sacred Heart for junior and senior high school.
And then K-State, did I hear mixed in there?
Yes.
Some sports things you mentioned.
Yes, so I have a journalism degree from Kansas State University. That's where I went for my undergraduate degree. Yep.
Okay. Both my degrees are from K-State, so.
All right.
Good.
Good.
Well, that tells us a little bit more about you on the personal level. Now, thinking about occupation and career, tell us, what do you do when you're not?
Sure. Well, yeah, you know, resume-ish stuff. I started out working in radio, so when I was in college, I was working at KSAL, and I also worked at 92.7 FM. Back then, it was a classic rock station, so I thoroughly enjoyed that. But then also, after going through the journalism school, I worked at the Manhattan Mercury while I was in Manhattan. And then upon graduating there, I went to Washington, D.C., and I earned a master's degree at George Washington University in nonprofit management, which includes trade associations. So I ended up working in communications for the National Small Business Association, worked with the Bush administration's Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy, and then also the National Association of Government Contractors. So had quite the background in association work, and turned that into a business. So now I do trade association benefit programs. So when an association wants to market to their members credit cards that are branded or insurance programs, we do that kind of thing.
So that would be the benefit. When you say benefit to the members,
Yeah,
the credit card
so
would be the benefit.
Yeah, we create benefit programs like that.
And when you say we, who's we?
Well, I own the
business?
business, yeah, so I'm an independent consultant, but then I also have several individuals that I contract with to do some of the work. So we do marketing for FedEx, US Bank, and then some of the bigger insurance companies.
Now, in this day and age, do you have a bricks and mortar kind of building?
Oh,
or
no.
online? You've got your phone
Oh,
out?
no.
It's
Yep.
very savvy?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's no bricks and mortar that's necessary.
Things change, huh?
Yeah, it's true. You know, my dad spent 50 years working for
brick building.
AT&T across the way, like I said. I think it was Western Electric when he started, and then it became AT&T, and then went through the many iterations, and now it's AT&T again. But I don't know that there are many people like that anymore that get the opportunity to stay with one company on a career path and climb a ladder like that. That's just not as common anymore, I think, and especially in Salina. You know, I tell people, when you go door to door and you really talk to people, you learn a lot about people's lives, and they'll be pretty open with you. And one challenge that we really face is that too often I'm going to talk to folks and they're between shifts. They're going from one job to their next job. So if you have a 2-parent family, generally that's a 4-job 2-parent family or a 3-job 2-parent family. If you ask people what they want, you don't get a political answer. I don't hear many people say, when I say, what do you want? You know, what is it that you're really after? And they'll say time. Time is the most common answer given when someone's at the door asked what they want. They want more time with their kids. They want more time with their family. They're working 2 30-hour-a-week jobs to make ends meet. And that's a real challenge for us. And I think it's a real challenge here in Salina for us, is the type of jobs that we're bringing in. Are they the quality, good-paying jobs where someone can work 8 to 5 and still be home for dinner with their families? And I think right now the answer is no, we don't have a lot of that. We have a lot of people who are working those multiple jobs, and they don't get the health insurance because of the 30-hour requirements and things like that. So if you really start looking into my district, it is a lot of folks who are working very hard to make ends meet and to raise their kids, and I think a lot of them would like to spend more time with their family. So one of the big challenges is bringing those kind of jobs to Salina.
I was thinking what got you into politics, and you've kind of answered some of that, what you've seen in your career bringing you back here. So when you're in Topeka, and then when you're here going door to door, you mentioned travel a little bit too. Any other favorite travel things or travel destinations?
You know, I try to go diving every now and again. It's kind of a new fun thing. It's
Colorado's not too far. That's reasonable.
Yeah, we're not. My girlfriend Katie and I, we try to go on at least one trip a year, and we've taken up diving. So that's our new thing. We haven't been doing it long. So
it's trying something
I haven't
new.
been very deep into the oceans or anything, but yeah, it's definitely something that we try to do to kind of escape the constant, work that being a legislator is. It's kind of a break to get away from everything.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's part of the purpose of our getting together here and visiting is who does what, when, how do we get to know these folks kind of on the personal level.
Sure.
One of the things I was reading a while back is some interest in something to do with travel is the Alec Conferences.
Sure.
And we talked about what are acronyms, and here I'm using one. So what is Alec, and why would you be involved in that? Some pros and cons, if you could help explain that.
Sure. Alec is the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's been around for decades. It's similar to NCSL, CGE, that's the National Council of State Legislatures, and then the, I don't know what CGE stands for, honestly. But there are many organizations. In fact, I think there are 18 of them that different legislators will belong to and attend their conferences. And some of them are very specific to a niche. Like there are some that the attorney members really like to attend. There are some that the people who are into corrections really like to attend, and so on. So I think there were, last I checked, about 18. Alec is one that tends to draw more conservative legislators. Whether they be Democrat or Republican. It's open to everybody, and I believe all parties are represented there. But I know that there's a lot of folks out there on the other end of the political spectrum who like to pick on Alec, but really NCSL is the exact same thing, and it's more of a liberal organization. But Alec actually doesn't receive money directly from the state, whereas NCSL does. So NCSL gets about $150,000 of taxpayer dollars every year. And that budget item is through the state general fund each time, whereas Alec is actually paid for generally through campaign funds. So like I don't receive a penny from the state. No taxpayer ever pays for me to travel. I don't ask for reimbursement from the state for those things. I just attend because I find it interesting and have the opportunity to introduce bills that we introduce in Kansas so that other states have the opportunity to see what's worked here, what does our language in our bills look like, maybe we can use that in our state. So this last time that I went, well, not last time because that was last week, but the time before that, I introduced a bill that deals with maintenance of effort requirements that basically makes those no longer something that a bureaucrat can simply just sign and say, we're going to commit the state to X amount of spending, which is the current process. Now it would require that the legislature actually take a vote on that they take a vote and say, we're going to allocate this amount of money to that expenditure. Too often we're being committed to money over here and there are these automatic spending increases. So for instance, the first time I voted on a budget was 2013, and that budget was about $5.9 billion. The last budget that went through was almost $6.5 billion. That's over a $500 million increase in state spending, and almost all of that was due to maintenance of effort, to automatic spending increases because the federal government is pushing more dollars to the state and more requirements onto the state. So having introduced that there and then introduced it here in Kansas, we have the opportunity for other states to follow the lead and also take up that kind of legislation.
So when you say introduced there and introduced here,
yeah.
What happened in what order? Had it already been pushed up in Kansas, or it was being talked about in Kansas?
That particular one I introduced at Alec and simultaneously introduced it here. So it'll be taken up in January in the state of Kansas, and it goes through a process at Alec because different constituencies get the opportunity to vote on whether they want that to be model legislation for the organization. And that's exactly what happens at NCSL as well and other organizations. They create model legislation so that states have a variety of places to look for the language to accomplish certain things in bills. And I think our revisor's office, because a legislator doesn't pick up a pen and just start writing a bill, we have a revisor's office and they go through and you'll talk to them and say, hey, I want to do this. And they'll take the statute where those types of things are appropriate and they'll write that in. So they come up with the language and the legalese to accomplish that. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll go to NCSL or ALEC or any one of the other organizations and find someone who wanted to do something similar, and they'll just take that language and put it in.
Yeah.
So that's where the model part comes from.
Part of what I'm hearing then, so you're living what you lived when you were younger, then in college, and now we like to be around people that have similar way of thinking, similar ideas, yet challenge in doing it correctly. So if we belong to the PTO, we belong to a service organization, go and do something. Belong somewhere, find out more, encourage the researchers, do the different layers of whatever it is here in Salina as well as there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Well, that helps explain that because I saw that ALEC and I really didn't know that acronym. So changing topics here a little bit. In case you just joined us, I'm Brenda Gutierrez, and with me is JR, our representative. Some specific questions, and I'm going to read these. They have to do with the tax and the budget. So these three things. What measures do you endorse, and what do you think about these three? Increasing state revenues, decreasing state expenses, balancing the state's budget in the coming session. So first, if you would speak to the very first one, the state revenues.
They all just kind of go together. So the revenues in the state of Kansas are the highest they've ever been in the history of the state. We do not lack the ability to bring in the dollars that are necessary to fund our state. What we've done is, like I said earlier, 2013, it was a $5.9 billion budget. Now it's 6.5. It's the spending that has definitely increased. We bring in the 5.9. We don't bring in the 6.5. That's the problem. So we are bringing in the dollars. It's just a matter of what do our expenses look like, and they've gotten quite out of control. And you mentioned here balancing the state's budget. You know, balancing a budget isn't what people care about. And again, I'll go back to going door to door and knocking on doors. If all you're doing is increasing spending and increasing taxes, people don't have an interest in a balanced budget. What they want is cutting government waste. And one thing that we committed to in the last budget, sitting on the Appropriations Committee, I had the opportunity to vote on this. We hired an outside auditing firm because the legislature, we only meet essentially for 3 months straight to develop legislation. To become an expert in every budget in the entirety of the administration is almost impossible, especially if you find out your committee assignment in late December. you're going in January and suddenly you've got to be an expert on KDOT. Well, that's probably not going to happen. You're not going to be able to go to the people at KDOT and justify to your colleagues, these guys need to spend the money here instead of here. They can spend less here and more here. They can, you don't have the background that's necessary, the proper information to make those kinds of determinations. So what we've done is we've hired auditors. So now it won't just be, and I'll give you some inside baseball here. When we're doing a budget, we have the governor's recommendation. Then we have the agency's recommendation, which may differ from the governor's recommendation, even though he's over the agency. And then we have our recommendation, which essentially goes to the Appropriations Committee and gets voted on. So what we're going to add there is another line that basically says this is the legislative auditor's recommendation. So we'll have three pieces of information to work from, not just what the governor's office wants and what the agency wants, but what makes sense from an auditor's point of view and a perspective to be more efficient in government. It's not always going to be politically the advantageous thing to do, but if they're going in there and they're finding programs that are outdated, that aren't accomplishing their goal, we'll have the opportunity to remove those programs. If they find programs that are very good at what they're doing, and we need to add dollars, that's going to be in there too. So this isn't necessarily just an automatic, let's go slash the budget kind of thing. We're going to have auditors in there and we're going to be able to have really good information to work off of because they're independent, they're coming from the outside. They've done this before. The auditors in North Carolina did a fantastic job of coming up with some ways for them to save money. They didn't pass all of them, but they worked on it.
What about the timeline then? So we're going to bring in this third. Is
They're
that
already
going
in
to
there.
okay, is this going to mur down? Are things going to take longer? Or is this going to speed some things up?
It depends.
And where does the money come from to add something else to pay for the auditors?
Yeah, it's $2.7 million is what the dollars were allocated. We're confident that we'll save that in
So that's
factors.
part of the plan. Okay.
Yeah, in factors of that dollar amount, we'll be able to save by having this good information and knowing what's working, what's not, where we need to have. I mean, right now you have plans to cut staffing. And you might have plans to cut staffing where you simply say, we're going to do it by attrition. So if somebody quits their job, retires, we're just not going to fill that role. What if that's a vital role? Mm-hmm. So you're not, it's
so they're
the
going to
hatchet.
make recommendations on that.
Yeah, it's more of the hatchet approach, like saying we're going to do a 10% across the board cut. Well, I'm not on board with 10% across the board cuts. You might be taking 10% from a very vital agency, and you might be taking only 10% from an agency that doesn't need to exist.
And who gets to be the hatchet person, even in the one that doesn't need to exist? Who's going to make that call? Who's going to say?
The legislature makes that call.
Okay.
And then the governor would then have to sign or veto a budget. But generally speaking, I think that folks are ready to make the necessary changes when they have the justification to do so. What we have a problem with is taking votes on things just based on, well, these guys are wasting money. Well, how and why? I need to know why. I'm not going to make a poor decision based upon somebody saying, things like, oh, they're not doing very good.
They're there now.
There has to be something to it.
So the auditors are in there now doing their thing.
Yep.
So you expect to see results when? The recommendations to take or give. When do we see results?
So we'll get recommendations in an order. They won't come all at once. What we'll get is certain agencies have been lined up first, and they're going through those. And most of the changes so far aren't political. Most of the changes that they're recommending so far are procurement related. So that's how the government buys things. So right now, we have many different agencies buying things on their own from a single source. We're not using the state's collective buying power to negotiate a contract with a lower dollar amount to purchase those items as a state. Mm-hmm. So you might have, I'll just use an example, special ed co-ops. They may be purchasing tests. When they purchase those tests, they're purchasing them one at a time, as opposed to the state having a contract to simply purchase those things and then distribute them out.
So they'd be unified, so the whole state would have.
You would be more unified in your purchasing. And I think that gives you the negotiating power of a state of 3 million people as opposed to simply going out as a small entity and trying to negotiate those prices, because you're not going to get the discounts. So you can look at other states and how they've done that, and we could have easily done that. We could go, look at other states, but we tend not to do that. Instead, we wait for somebody to give us that wake-up call.
So you feel like that's something that's going to help with our balanced budget this next session.
Right.
Any other thing or two that you want to call out that this is going to help us balance our budget this session?
Well, I think that's primarily what's going to help us balance our budget, is just having good information and knowing where cuts can be made strategically and without an impact on programs that are working, and where we need to put dollars to have a bigger impact. And I think corrections is probably a good place to look for places where we can put the dollars in up front and then see a dollar savings down the road. And I think you'll probably see the auditors come up with that recommendation as well, is that we currently spend a lot of money on putting people in prison. And it's very costly to have someone in a jail, as opposed to having programs out there, prevention programs, programs that reduce recidivism, things like that. There's a program in Wyandotte County that was very successful that we're hoping to mirror across the state. It saved hundreds of thousands of dollars there in Wyandotte County. So if we can spread that across the state, that's millions of dollars in savings by just addressing juvenile offenders earlier on in life, as opposed to waiting and incarcerating. So there are a lot of ideas out there, and I think that that we're ready to make some of those changes so that the dollars can be saved. And people get a better quality of life out of that too.
The idea, so locally in our schools, SURGE, the Restorative Justice program that's going on.
Exactly.
So locally there is work in that area.
Yes.
And how can we prevent, how can we help the youth, how can we help the families, how can we help the community? So I'm glad to hear that, say if you're looking at Wichita, hopefully other people, if you have a chance to lift up Salina and Saline County in that program.
Exactly. And I was just speaking with Andy Grievous before I came over here, and there's definitely a willingness to start moving in that direction, where we're addressing those problems on the community level with programs that work rather than jail cells.
And that's us and we, meaning our friends and neighbors. We don't have to wait for Topeka. We don't have to wait for Washington, D.C. to say, hey, Salina, why don't you guys try SURGE?
Right,
see what that's all about.
And we're using drug courts, and we're doing things that are definitely working and need to be mirrored across the state. So in some
results,
ways,
that's good.
Yeah, in some ways, we show how things can be replicated, and we'll take that to Topeka. So it's really what we're doing here that we'll take to Topeka and say, well, if drug courts are working, then let's start doing this across the state. Let's start creating those savings because we're helping people rather than just sticking them in a cell.
Thank you. I'm Brenda Gutierrez. Thank you for joining us. If you just tuned in, I'm here with JR, and we've been talking a little bit about taxes and budgets, and now we're going to move on. The actual committee that you're chair on, the transportation, if you could tell us a little bit more. I have transportation and public safety. What does that mean, and what do you do as chair, and how can we relate to what that is?
Sure. So there are policy committees. So there is a transportation committee and there's a corrections committee that deal with policy. But because I serve on the appropriations committee, which is my morning committee, I'm also a chair of
morning SAT or morning in the AM?
AM.
Okay.
Good one. But then in the evening, I chair the Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee. So what we do is we would get together and we would focus on the Kansas Department of Transportation, the Kansas National Guard, the Kansas Highway Patrol, and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation are primarily the largest agencies that are under our purview. So we come up with budget recommendations initially. So we're the ones doing the research on those agencies specifically. And then we would go, well, I would go to the Appropriations Committee, and I would take our recommendations to them, and then the Appropriations Committee would decide whether we vote up or down the recommendations of the Budget Committee. So there's a Budget Committee for Education, there's a Budget Committee for Health and Human Services, and so on. So primarily I deal with the budgets, though, of transportation and the public safety agencies, which has a huge impact on Salina. We're the home of the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Academy, the National Guard, the National Guard's Crisis City. We have a KDOT headquarters here, of course. We're at the confluence of two major interstates. So there are a lot of opportunities there to have a big impact on Salina. We also are home to K-State Polytechnic, which has the UAV program, which has a big impact, and the flight school has a big impact on both transportation, but then also on public safety when it comes to the use of UAVs in crisis situations.
Yeah. So you've given us shout-outs to some good things here that we have in Salina.
Yeah.
The opposite of that, when you're doing your door-to-door, when you have the response, people kind of roll their eyes, government's broke, government needs fixed. How do you respond to that? And are you able to shout out and say, look what we've got in Salina, Saline County, let's do some positives?
Yeah. Well, we're in a tough national economy. There's no doubt about that, and I think the tide is sort of turning. We're starting to recover and really see some of the recovery, but there are some systemic issues with the way that we've set up our economic system, and as long as those are there, we are going to have some problems. Like I said, the 30-hour work week is becoming the new norm. That's a huge problem.
The 2 jobs you mentioned, yes.
Right, and I know that there are some things that we can do, but there are certainly some things that are at the national level that are a little more difficult to take care of. But that is having a profound impact. And you see it every day when I'm going door to door over the course of an election or in between elections during the summer. That's what I'm hearing and I'm seeing, and it's difficult.
So if people wanted to get a hold of you, can you paint the picture for us? How does someone let you know, I have a question, I have a concern, or
Sure.
What are you doing for me? How does somebody get a hold of you, and how would you like us to get a hold of you?
The easiest way to get a response quickly is email, and I'm at jr@claeys.com. That's the easiest. You can also call me on my phone. I'm at 785-250-5758. So if anyone has questions, concerns, has difficulty dealing with a state agency, that's what I'm here for. A big part of my job in the off session especially is helping people when they're trying to deal with a state agency and the service they're receiving through them. So sometimes it does require some intervention. So if you are struggling with an agency, I'm absolutely more than happy to help.
And it's okay for us to call and say, hey, would you meet me for coffee?
Absolutely.
Hey, is it okay to...
Absolutely.
We
Yeah.
discussed this earlier.
Yeah.
So meeting for coffee is good. What about in Topeka? How do we get a hold of you if we have something, we want to tour, we want to see your office?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We want to know,
I
this
love
is
that.
coming up on Friday.
Yeah.
Will you see me before Friday?
If anyone's ever in Topeka during the session, absolutely pop into the office. We each have a legislative assistant. That's as far as it goes, and some of us share. But that individual can set up appointments or let you know which committee or when I'm between committees and that sort of thing. Our committee schedule and our floor schedule is pretty packed during the day, but we can always pop out and make sure that we see folks who are in town, and we can arrange tours, anything that anyone would like to see. They even do the dome tours again now, so
Yes.
that's very exciting. I think they're only doing them in the afternoon, but there's lots of opportunities, and we do have a very historic building that's been renovated, so it's worth a visit.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that, knowing that, yes, he will take my phone call, or
Oh, yeah,
somebody will call me
absolutely.
back if you're busy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Voicemail you mentioned.
Yeah.
What about texting?
Yeah, feel free to text.
kind of
I mean,
thing,
it's
too?
the same phone number.
You're good with that too?
Yeah.
Okay,
Doesn't
good.
bother me. Name who you are.
Yes, you want to call back? Yeah. So if I call you and I have a local issue, what are some things that you have done for Salina? So local issues that you have taken,
Sure.
if you could give us, like, I'm working on these 7 things and this progress on
goodness.
this one. If I want to give
Yeah.
a highlight, what some examples of how you have helped your
I'm
community?
not gonna let you get away with making me highlight just one. So, in
He's scrolling.
In Topeka, it's I have introduced several bills, but I'm also, because I'm on the Appropriations Committee, several opportunities exist to simply put an amendment into a bill on the fly. So I do have a few of them teed up and ready to go. I know Salina Family Health Care and the Salina Regional Health Center have an interest in recruiting pharmacists. It's becoming a bigger issue as smaller pharmacies are closing, and there's a lot of consolidation in that industry. So we're going to add pharmacy to the student loan repayment program, which would allow us, not just us, but basically anyone west of Topeka, to be able to do student loan repayment through the national program if we bring a pharmacist here. So it's a huge recruiting incentive. I'm working on the Commerce Department's Innovation Growth Program. What we'd really like to do is bring a small business incubator to Salina. There's one in Wichita, there's one in Manhattan, there's one in Lawrence, but maybe there's one in the Kansas City metro, but we do not have one here. And one of the big problems that we have is we have one of the top aviation programs in the country, if not the best. We're top 3, if not number 1, when it comes to UAVs and UAV training. The first in having commercial UAV training available in the United States. We have to capitalize on those things. This is a tremendous multi-billion-dollar opportunity that's right here in our backyard. And what's happening is those students are leaving right after they graduate. there isn't an opportunity for the job that comes after with that training. So what we'd like to do is create a small business incubator where people can lease or rent space. There's precedent for these commercialization contracts and things like that that we end up growing businesses here in Salina, the small businesses that are going to do the manufacturing, the research, the development. The biggest thing that UAVs are useful for is agriculture, and we're right in the middle of that. So it makes tremendous sense. We have the bombing range, we have Crisis City, we have Fort Riley right down the road. We have the KHP training center, the Highway Patrol Training Center here. So there are a lot of opportunities for all of this to sort of fit together into a major economic impact on Salina. So I'd really like to see that happen, and we're going to work in the Appropriations Committee to put the dollars in to make that happen.
Because a lot of people say, there's jobs down the road. How do we get jobs here? How do we
and
get
that's
people
the problem.
back here?
Yeah, I mean that's really what it comes down to. Another thing is our Kansas Highway Patrol Training Academy. There for the longest time, we were so low on the pay scale that we got down to, I think, 6 graduates in a class last year. We're 100 troopers short of full staffing. The replacement rate is 50 people eligible for retirement. You can't have 6 come in, 50 go out, and be down 100 and think that's a sustainable system. So last session, I was able to get into the budget almost a 10% increase in pay for our Kansas Highway Patrolmen through using asset forfeiture funds. So we were able to put together a 10% raise for those folks that'll go into effect, I think, January 1st of this coming year. What that does for us here in Salina is those folks who are in training, if you have 6 of them, that's 6 people who are being paid for a full-time job who are living here in Salina. That's economic impact. That's real jobs. We need that number to be 25, 30, 35. So the class after that, after we got that passed, I think hit the 25-person mark. So just
Growth
that one,
potential,
yes. that one change, you can already see the benefits of it. We have 25 jobs in Salina instead of 6. Yeah. And that's that immediate. So that was a huge impact move. As far as constituents bringing me bills that they'd like to see passed, in Kansas, our grandparents are often foster parents to their kids' kids, the grandkids. When you're in that situation, there isn't a lot of support. You're expected just as family to take care of a kid. Well, that doesn't seem, I don't want to put grandparents in a position where they're saying no because they're on fixed incomes and they're having a tough time making ends meet themselves.
When it comes to food and
when
transportation
it comes, exactly.
and healthcare and clothing and those
exactly.
kind of things. Okay.
So if we have a foster system and we have a grandparent system, that grandparent system probably needs to have some level of support that's available to them so that we are not putting kids in foster care when there is a viable option for family to take them if they could have that additional support to be able to make ends meet. And we don't want to put a kid in a situation where they're not able to make ends meet. That's a very difficult situation. So I've had several grandparents come to me in the district, and these are people whose parents I went to school with and grew up with, and it's very rewarding to be in this position and to be able to help out the folks that you grew up with. I mean, there's nothing like that feeling. But that is one of the bills that I'm also working on is a system. I don't want to call it an incentive, but basically just something to level things out to support the folks who are making that sacrifice. And it's a difficult thing to do. I mean, especially when you have grandparents who are on those fixed incomes and are just having trouble, making ends meet as it is. To add a child into that, that additional support might be the difference between yes, absolutely, and I don't know if I can handle that. So we want to make sure that the answer is yes and that we can keep those families together. That's extremely important. I also have concealed carry in public buildings. We over
That's
in the
kind
city
of a hot
county
topic right now.
Oh, sure. Over in the city county building, though, we have multiple floors, and the top floor is secured because it's where the courts are.
The legal court, yep.
The way that they worded the bill, though, it's an all or nothing. The whole building or none of the building. So this is basically a fix that says that you can do a portion of a building. And then that would be acceptable to everybody on all sides, and be able to continue to secure the third floor of the city-county building and have that be a gun-free zone where you have officers up there, you have the metal detectors, you have all of that set up. So that was something that was brought to me as well, and we'll get that pushed through. And then you might have already heard about Salina downtown, and you probably heard the acronym TIF frequently when it comes to that, and the TIF is out there. It's tax increment financing. Basically, when you build something, any of the additional revenue and taxes that's created by all of that construction and new business, that additional tax goes to pay for the infrastructure improvements. So if we decide to do additional parking on Santa Fe, bring it down to 2 lanes, do more walking spaces, that kind of thing, the public portion of that is funded by the increase in those taxes that comes in through the businesses that then come in after the TIF is passed. Well, right now, TIF can only be used for museums if you're going vertical, but infrastructure, so lights, stoplights, road improvements, curbs, things like that. What I'd like to do is add in there buildings that are 65 years or older to be able to go in and renovate some of our historic downtown buildings. And make them available then for new businesses to come in. So if there is someone who wants to come in and renovate a building and turn that into or take a historic structure and I guess make that into a business inside there, they would have the opportunity to use TIF funds to do that.
So bringing down the people, the living, the jobs, how about employment? How are things going with employment? Or you have any thoughts that you'd like to add on the ups and the downs? We've kind of touched on employment.
Yeah, I mean, the unemployment rate is tremendously low. I think it's the lowest it's been in a decade. We're at 4.1% in Kansas. It's darn near full employment. I mean, it's difficult to have anything lower than 3.5%. But even though it's at 4.1%, like I said earlier, if those jobs are jobs where someone has to have 2, and I know too many people, and thank goodness for the folks at Menards and Quick Shop, but I'm going to use these guys as an example because I've run into it a few times. Someone's working the day shift at Menards and the night shift at Quick Shop, and the husband's out working as well. And I don't think that's how we envision our community growing. I don't think that's how we envision people spending their time is constantly at work. I think that we want to have a community where people do get to spend time with their families, do get to go to their kids' soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, and this isn't someone's fault. I think everyone wants that opportunity to spend more time with their kids. And
building in the layers, we've talked about this a little bit at my work, that having it be okay that everyone goes to parent-teacher conference, no matter where you work. It's what you do. Your employee and your employer relationship is such that you support the family, you support public education or private education, and little things like that. How can you, whether it's early child care, what can we do together to work on that?
Yeah, and I think many employers are good about that.
And even just to ask them, to have that conversation. What do you think about this?
Right.
Would you consider this?
Right. I don't know that government's the answer for those kinds of things. I think it is. It's relationships, and it's having good quality employers in your community, and that's what we want here. We want quality employers, and it tends to be the small businesses who are the least rigid about those things. So small businesses is where our growth is, and that's what we want more of.
To keep with that. Good.
Yep.
We haven't said too much about public education. Anything that you would like to add about what's going on with education?
Well, you may already know the block grants is how we're currently funding education in the state of Kansas. So we've taken down the silos, and silos essentially means that there used to be very strict requirements on how each dollar was spent. So you'd get a certain amount of money for capital expenditures, you'd get a certain amount of money for this, and so on. We took down those barriers with the block grant bill. So now you're not deciding, what color of Suburban you want. Instead, you can take those dollars and we can have more kindergarten teachers in Salina with all-day kindergarten. We can use those funds where our local community needs them and put that control locally. So we do have that, but then in this next session, we'll probably have a new system for financing our schools. The block grant was intended to be a 2-year stopgap while we create a new system of finance for schools in the state of Kansas.
So rewriting the funding formula, I've heard and read something
Right.
about that. Is
So
that what you're
that's-
getting at?
So that's exactly what's going to happen, and that'll happen in the Appropriations Committee on which I serve. So we'll have the opportunity to create a new system of finance for schools that's more sane, that's more targeted towards local control over those dollars, spending the dollars where they need to be spent, putting dollars into the classroom where they belong. Like I said, too often we were putting dollars into this pot, and there were so many restrictions that I think in Kansas City, Kansas, they spent $45,000 on a grand piano. Well, they wanted to spend it on other things, but that's what we've stuck them with is, what capital expenditure do you want to spend this on? And capital expenditures are important, don't get me wrong. It's just that there are times when local control would stop some of the spending on things that aren't necessary. And you'll often hear unencumbered balances and things like that when we talk about school finance and the dollars that are out there. That's because we've filled up certain pots of money.
So we're going to see
with
some
things people
results
don't
with
need.
this, with taking down the silos?
I think
This
we've
is-
already seen them. I mean, the two votes that I've had that have dealt with education that were major votes have resulted in a 4.8% increase in USD 305 teacher salaries, and then the most recent one was a 2.5% increase. So the teachers are being paid better because of the votes that we're taking. And I think that's always been primarily one of my concerns going in was we need to attract and retain the best teachers. And the way to do that is respect, and respect through the paycheck. And I think that as we keep moving forward, that's going to be a big focus, is putting the dollars where they belong, and I think rewarding our teachers.
In all areas.
Yeah.
But, if there's anything else, I have one last question, but I wanted to give you a moment. If there's something else that we hadn't touched on, just have like a couple of minutes of something that you would like to put out that we haven't covered yet.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here and to talk about these issues. I think that, going into the legislative session, we have a lot of different things that are going on at the same time. And sometimes the biggest issues are taxes and the budget. And those get focused on a lot. But there are a lot of incremental things that we can do right here for Salina. And I've mentioned a few that I'm working on, but there are a lot of ways that we can have a major impact when it comes to jobs, when it comes to people's families. We want to make the biggest impact we can, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity on the Appropriations Committee to be a part of the new school finance formula, because I think that is going to require a defense of our values.
We're going to have to get
and what we
together and
care
talk
about.
again in maybe 6 months
Yeah.
or so, because we haven't got to touch much on housing, and there's some poverty questions I think people would like to know a little
Sure.
bit more about.
Are we running out?
Well, one last question. Who do you trust?
Who do I trust? Wow, I implicitly trust my parents. I think in order here, or
That's
how
up
do
to you.
want that?
That's totally up to you. Who do you trust?
I think I trust a lot of people. I think that I trust family. I trust my friends. I definitely trust many of my colleagues, and I think as a result of that trust, we make really good decisions.
Good deal. That's always a fun one to ask. So
Sure.
take that question on to someone else would be part of what we would ask you to do. Continuing this conversation, we've got to visit a little bit here today in the Community Access TV studios, and I'm Brenda Gutierrez, and we wanted to thank you for this time together. So we do look forward to getting together again, maybe 6 months or so. We
Sure.
can have you back, and you have shared, whether it's by phone, by text, by email, that people call you, come see you in Topeka. Come for coffee. He'll meet you at
Yeah,
coffee somewhere if
absolutely.
you're going to do that. So we definitely wanted to thank you, and
Yeah, thank you, Brenda.
see you again.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.